So normally here on the beginning of each podcast, you normally hear me give a sound bite or a brief hook of what will be coming up in that podcast episode. But I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to kind of shake things up before the intro, and I wanted to give you a little insight of this episode. Normally I have where I'm teaching about a topic or a point to help you grow spiritually as a husband and father. But also I've had guests on that have been teaching and sharing thoughts of helping you grow as well. But I also wanted to be able to bring men on here that have gone through some things and just to have them share their testimony. And that's what you're going to hear on this episode of the 318 Project, as I have a guest who's going to share with you about how God just radically restored and strengthened his marriage. So stick around for this episode of the 318 Project.
This is the 318 Project, a guide to equip men through godly principles and develop as husbands, fathers, and sons. And now, your host, Ryan Hare.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the 318 Project. And my guest today is someone I met about 17 years ago when I was first hired on with the Jacksonville Fire Department. I met Todd. He was an instructor kind of out at the training school. He was helping out when we were recruits for the recruit class once you got hired on. And so he was kind of teaching the Hazmat, Hazardous Materials class, and that's kind of where I met him the first few times. And then a few years later, he was one of the main instructors for an actual hazardous material class course where you could get certified. And we went through I went through the course with several others to get state certified as a hazardous technician in case I ever wanted to work on the hazmat team. But that was where Todd kind of worked quite a bit of his career was with hazmat and with the hazardous materials. So I want to welcome you, and my guest is Todd Smith. Hi, Todd. Thanks for joining me today on the 318 Project.
Well, thank you for having me, Ryan. It's an honor. I can't believe it's been 17 years, right?
Yeah. Time's flying. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, yeah. So I retired in 2014, August of 2014, after 26 years on the job. Did 22 of those years at Station 7 on the Hazmat team, and was certainly deeply entrenched in the hazardous materials response and training world, and have been since then. I currently teach classes and courses around the country for a private company known as Federal Resources Incorporated, where we teach a variety of hazardous materials courses. But my primary focus is I teach a propane emergency response class. That's pretty much where I'm at these days, as work-wise.
It doesn't seem like you've been retired 6 years now, so and I'm creeping up on that, truly. And I'm creeping up there too. So I understand. Once you get to that point in your career, it's all downhill, and before you know it, it's over. But yeah, yep. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. So, do you have any children, families that you have?
Yes, sir. Yep, I have 3 boys. Ages 25, 17, and 15.
Wow. Okay. Now the reason that I asked Todd to be on this episode is, again, years ago, kind of heard some stuff going around in the fire department, and again, that's the tradition. You hear rumors and other things going on, but then later on, hearing about his testimony and what God has done with Todd and in his marriage. And I really felt led to have him as a guest on this episode. So Todd, if you don't mind, can you kind of share with us, from early on, kind of generally where it started, and just kind of tell us about your testimony and all the kind of went through with the situation?
Absolutely, Ryan. Well, as I'm looking at the calendar on my phone, I realized that it was exactly 8 years ago, almost to the day.
Wow.
The 26th would have been the actual day that my marriage felt just, I don't want to say ran off the rails. It plummeted out of the sky and crashed to the ground in a gigantic fireball. Um, so I met, I'll go back and tell you the fairy tale story of my life with my wife. Um, we met in February of 2000 on an airplane. Um, I was traveling home from a hazmat class out in New Mexico, and she was traveling back to her home in New Orleans from my wife was a microbiologist, and she was traveling home from New Mexico as well, from a seminar she'd been attending in Albuquerque. We were on the same return flight out of Albuquerque to, I really can't remember where we connected through, but anyway, we connected through somewhere, and then we had a layover, and we literally sat across the aisle from one another, and we talked the entire flight home, and or at least to that first stop. And there we exchanged email addresses, and we just corresponded through email for the next few weeks, few months. I had just gone through my first divorce, and she was going through her first divorce. So anyway, we commiserated and we talked, we discussed, and then we eventually, several months later, ended up meeting. I flew out to Texas to pick up my dad, and he and I drove from Houston to back here to Jacksonville Beach, and we stopped in New Orleans on the way, and that was my first date with my wife. And so a love story began. We fell in love, and I convinced her to move to Jacksonville Beach, Florida, from her job in New Orleans, and she was able to get a job at the Florida Health Department there on State Street in downtown, and so she moved here in April of 2001. We got engaged, and then we married in May of 2002. She grew up Catholic. I grew up with no church background at all. We attended church occasionally. We took when the boys were born, when our two boys were born, we took them back to New Orleans for their christening. Her grandfather was a deacon in the church there. But I truly had no formal relationship with Jesus Christ at that time. I would say I was a believer, and that I believed in. I believed that he existed, and I believed that the Bible was real, and I didn't put my faith in Christ at the time.
Right.
So as our marriage trotted along, and I basically behaved as a non-believer. I just selfishly wanted my married life, but I also wanted my time. I wanted
Right.
to go
Oh, yeah.
surfing, and I wanted to go on trips, and I wanted to go out and have beers with the boys, and I just, I mean, I don't know that I played super crazy hard, but I certainly I played. I wasn't devoted to my wife or my marriage, um,
Right.
as I should have been. And of course, that led me to really devalue our marriage, because the whole time, I was looking at pornography and um, really indiscriminately, I would flirt and mess around with other girls. And so we trotted along through our marriage like that, like any other couple, I guess. Maybe not any other couple, but a lot of couples that we know of on the fire department.
Right.
And in 2012, in October of 2012, um, I, that was the point that my wife had reached her boiling point. And she basically left me. She told me she didn't love me, and that she loved somebody else, and that she was ready to have a life with a partner, not a roommate. And
Right.
so, admittedly, man, and that's the rumors you heard on the fire department, because it was another fireman, and of
Right.
course it rippled through the fire department, and it was. I would argue that both he and I were fairly well known, because we both worked at the academy, and had a lot of interaction with a lot of different people on the job, and so anyway, so it created a pretty significant division of a me versus him, and that type activity, um, and to be honest with you, I haven't spoken to him in just about this many years, and truth be told, I saw him about a month ago, and when I say I haven't spoke to him, that's a lie, because the first words I've ever spoken to him came out of my mouth about a month ago to him at the training academy. It was a simple, "Hey, what's happening?" But those are the first words I've spoken to him in 8 years. Uh, but going back to the wreckage of my marriage, early on in our separation and ultimately divorce, um, I forgave her. I forgave her, and because I knew I was culpable, I knew that it'd be way easy just to point a finger and blame her and blame him, and and be mad at the world, and well, I was mad for a long time. There's no question, but I realized that I bear as much, if not more, responsibility, and because I basically allowed my marriage to erode, and I allowed her to want to seek comfort, security, love from somebody else. And I knew that I had to change. I knew that I needed to change who I was. And in that process, and all throughout my whole life, Ryan, I was pretty, I was a pretty, so I was just saying that in and out of martial arts, I've kind of delved into the Eastern philosophies, if you will, of Taoism and Buddhism and all that cool spiritual stuff, I guess.
Right.
And kind of thought I was a spiritual type guy, and so, but truth be told, it was just a way for me to be selfish. It was a way for me just to do what I wanted to do and be nice to people, and people liked me, and I was able to get away with a lot of stuff. And
Right.
well, I say get away with it. I was able to hide it for a while, and then it blew up in my face. But so I found myself and just destroyed, to be honest with you. Live on my own, kids coming to see me every week, a couple times a week, and trying to juggle being a single father, and I just knew that there was more to life. I knew there was more to being a role model. I knew there was more to being a father. I knew there was more to being a husband, a friend, and I broke down, man. I just got on my knees and I just prayed and prayed and prayed and cried out, screamed out, yelled, cussed, banged my fist on the floor, punched walls. I did it all, and and then I crawled into 1122, the Church of 1122,
Well,
in February of 2013, and from there I basically just began the journey. And admittedly, the journey has been slow, for me, because of my
right.
reluctance to fully surrender. And I would surrender some, but I'd hold back others. I'd surrender some, and and
Right.
so and so this was it was obviously a long journey, and so so that was 2013, and in 2000 and at the end of 2016, after I had gone through a few relationships, she had gone through some relationships, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize she was attending 1122. And Pastor Joby the church had been doing a series called Act Like Men. And it was a very, very powerful, convicting sermon that really punched me square in the face every single Sunday. And the punch was so enjoyable, I would listen to the sermon probably 2 or 3 different times throughout the week. So
Right.
I enjoyed a thorough teeth kicking. But it was what I needed to hear,
Right.
It was what I needed to be told. It was to quote Dave Ramsey, it's either paint or get off the ladder. I've been
Right.
standing on the ladder for just too long, so it was, the moves to grow closer to God were there. And the Act Like Men series had an impact on her as well. And just purely by the grace of God, through his timing only his timing, we maintained a very amicable and positive co-parenting relationship with our boys. I made that a priority from the very beginning. That I never spoke ill of her. I never, I made it a point to never defame her in any
Right.
way.
Wow.
And I made it a point that if there was ever a time that she needed me to, like if she had the kids and needed me to take them for whatever, I would do it. I would make
Yeah.
the time. Now, admittedly, my schedule was crazy because in 2014 I retired and I started working just as much as I possibly could because I was now a single parent and I had alimony and
Right.
child support and there was things to pay. So my time did get reduced some because I was now working a lot, teaching a lot, traveling a lot. Even when I was still in the fire department, I was still traveling, teaching, and taking off and covering shifts. And, so I would go teach classes for a few days, come back, and then work a few days. So, that gets you can spend a week in the firehouse and not even realize where you are. But, but nonetheless, we had an amicable relationship with the kid, for the boys. And as the end of 2016 neared, I knew that I needed to talk to her and confess to her that while I got over the divorce, I never got over her.
Right.
Because I found myself really I was in a relationship at this time, or prior to just all this. This girl and I broke up just before Amy and I got back together. And I knew that I was repeating patterns that had plagued me through my marriage. And I was basically self-destructing a relationship.
Yeah.
And I realized that, it's because I never got over the loss of my wife, Amy. So anyway, I called her with just an open heart. And I said, listen, I got to confess this to you that I never got over you. I may have gotten over the divorce, but anyway. And then she shared with me that she'd been praying for this phone call for 3 months.
Wow.
And that she'd been in her disciple group and been praying that God would bring us back together. And man, I fell on my knees in gratitude at that moment, and we made a date to sit down and talk. And I think it was around Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving, maybe, that we just I went over to the house and to my previous house, and we sat down and we just talked for hours. And we realized that we were living a godless marriage. God was not in the middle of our marriage. He was not first. He was not before all things. And, I was before all things in my view, and she was before all things in her view. Well, I'll give it, the kids are probably before all things in her view. But, me being the selfish guy, it was all about me. But,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we knew this is where God wanted us. We knew it. And so we got remarried as quickly as we possibly could. At 11:22, Pastor Joby remarried us. And we feel lucky because we know he doesn't do any weddings anymore. But we don't know. We feel lucky that he performed our service for us because it was on a Sunday afternoon, about 1:30 in the afternoon, after a sermon.
Yeah, after a message.
It was actually at 2:30 in the afternoon after a sermon. And anyway, just magical. But right now, Ryan, our life is centered around God, and it is centered around discipleship. It is centered around gratitude for one another, gratitude for the Lord bringing us back together. And I'm honored to share this story because, unfortunately, I mean, I have many friends who have gone through a divorce or going through a divorce, who by all rights appear to be floundering and lost and wandering in the dark,
Yeah.
And if I could help shine a light and help them turn to Jesus and change the trajectory of their life, their children's life, their future married life, man, I can't think of a higher calling than that.
It's a powerful testimony just to hear that and to hear all that about the restoration and healing, and even seeing how God moved and directed not just you but both of you to bringing you back together. Because just knowing that it was able to work out. Now, one thing that you didn't really say, or I didn't catch it, but how were your sons? How were they handling all this during this time of the divorce and being separated? We see a lot of it now is that, two homes, two separate families. That was kind of awkward probably for them, especially, as you're saying, the younger ones were still pretty young. Just adjusting to that different, that different lifestyle of, instead of one home, now you got two homes. How was their attitude toward all this during this time?
Well, how many times has these words been uttered? But kids are resilient, man. They bounce back, and we're keeping a face for the kids, and man, kids see through all that stuff. And the reality is us maintaining a friendly co-parenting behavior to one another. It wasn't, there was never curse words exchanged. There was never, tell your mom I said, tell your dad I said, none of that. That helped a lot. But, well, and I'll say this too, man, I was able to grow closer to my boys, because there were so many nights, man, I was crushed, and my youngest would crawl in bed with me, and we would just snuggle. And our favorite song to sing was 10,000 Reasons by Matt Redman, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And those are cherished memories, to be honest with you. But there were certainly issues, no two parents parent the same way.
Right. Oh,
And
yeah.
when you're in a separate homes, I mean, kids know how to work their parents against each other. So there was those moments. But when Amy and I got back together, man, it brought us all so much closer. It really has. And it was it was just magical, really magical for them to witness us being remarried, and for us walking in the light we're walking in now. They're teenagers, so we have issues.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And so it's not all you know, pixies and fairy tales and angel dust and
No.
oh father, oh mother, it's
Yeah.
not. It's but it's certainly we're a family, and I don't know how much of a family we were before. Like we look good in pictures, and we
Right.
had all the right photos that showed us as a family, but
Playing family.
you know, it, when 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 your moral foundation is so eroded that you don't know what you're standing on, man, nothing will stand. Nothing you build, nothing you desire to build is going to stand on that. And that's where our marriage was. I had allowed it just to erode away to where we were a house of cards built on quicksand. And no wonder it crumbled,
Right.
no wonder it crumbled,
Yeah.
and and it's such a different environment here now. It truly is.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. Like you said, it's if that marriage really isn't on that foundation, and there are there are good marriages that people have, whether, that may not be really in church, but
Right.
we know that the most effective, marriages are those that are centered with Christ, and not just, oh, we go to church, but like you said, that's the focal point, for each of you. But and as a married couple, that he's first, and then your marriage partner, is that second person, and then family. And that's the thing with so many of us, even in church. We see so many people that are in church, kind of playing church, maybe in a sense, kind of like you were saying, even playing family,
Right.
going through these motions of, well, that's what I saw as my parents, or this is what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And they just, that's how they operate, but they really don't, put that foundation of Christ at the center, at the forefront of their relationship, with Him, or in their marriage.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I think that's, in our world on the fire department, Ryan, man, it's, we all put on somewhat of a facade, and we all have an image that we want to portray, right?
Oh yeah.
And and the greatest compliment any fireman could ever hear is that guy's a good fireman, right? Or she's a good firefighter, or whatever.
Right.
But you know, here's what I do know about that. Being retired now is, so many of us on the job think that our legacy is the job, and um, that when we retire, the job is going to miss us.
Right.
well, guess what?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen,
It just keeps moving.
exactly right. And truth be told, you know, that type of arrogance and that type of insecurity is truly born out of not knowing who you are in Christ, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And because the reality is, um, I should have been training my replacement all along. And when I walked away, there should have been, no worries that I would ever be needed again, you know?
Right.
And I never really walked away thinking I was needed, but, but, it's like our kids, as we raise our children to become adults, we want them to step away from the house prepared as a young adult, not as
Yeah.
a kid, right? We
Right.
don't want
Oh,
them
yeah.
to. We don't want them to be great at following our commands to clean your room, even though we'd like them to clean the room. But we
Yeah.
want them to be able to make the decisions for themselves, right? That, hey, listen, I want to choose to do the right things versus making poor choices that put them way behind the eight ball from the start, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's I don't know. I feel like that in our world on the fire department that we hide behind a facade, we hide behind an image that we want to portray, and a lot of times, that image really allows us to drag ourselves into some really, really dark places.
Oh, definitely. Because we've kind of seen some of that with some of the guys in past years that have, unfortunately let things become controlling their lives of addictions and certain things.
Yeah,
Because like you said, it's that image. And this is one of the things that a lot of guys that when we talked at the station, at the table or stuff was, guys would say, well, how can I talk to somebody? We kind of always emphasize, hey, if you have issues, call the chaplain or call EAP, for help. But there's a lot of times guys just want to talk to another guy at the station that can relate. But you've seen it and I've seen it. A lot of us have. We see guys that as soon as they tell this person in confidence, before they know it, the going joke, telephone, tell a fireman.
yeah,
And like you said, before you knew it, your business was around the whole department of what was going on.
oh
So it's
yeah,
kind of like we have this mentality of how can I trust anybody to confide in and really tell them my problems, even though I don't feel like I want to go to a counselor. I just need to talk with a friend and a confidant, and I don't have anybody to trust. And we've at the same time, you've seen it in the firehouse where you tell somebody something, and before you know it, they use it against you just to pick at you to see if you're going to
yep,
get riled up.
yep,
So we see a
yep,
lot of guys that bottle up a lot of stuff. It may not be nothing major, whether it's just the stresses of life, this being at the station,
yeah,
some issues at home. Kids are acting a certain way, financial struggles, and they just simply want to talk, but they're afraid because again, it could be used against them. So they bottle it up, and then the only other ways they know is to cope through maybe drugs or alcohol, or even going out, finding another woman or something, just to relieve these stresses in a sense. And before you know it, it's destroyed their life, their marriage, and even sometimes their job.
right, right. That's the scary thing.
So, just again, hearing all that you shared, and again, with everything that you went through, seeing how God has really restored not just your marriage, but your relationship with your boys in that whole situation, and just allowing you to 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 just restore that marriage and strengthen that relationship in your family. Now I know you said you kind of have only talked to him that one time. This is kind of that issue, but in a sense, have you really forgiven him for kind of? I know you kind of said you kind of
Yes,
had reconciled
yeah.
with your wife, but even with him, with all that had happened with that, have you gone through that
Yeah,
part of the
yeah.
forgiveness? And
I have. I have forgiven him. I've forgave him years ago, to be honest with you. At least I started telling myself that. And, and I've certainly reached a point in 8 years that I have zero desire to call him and go, "Hey, man, what's happening?" But
Right.
I have prayed for him in prayers that he would find himself on his knees. He's got two young boys too. Our boys are the same ages, and that he would find Jesus himself and become the role model for his teenage boys. That, I mean, the reality is, when, and you know this, I mean, you have children yourself, right? And
Yeah.
we're raising the next
Practically same age
generation.
as yours.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
raising the next generation, and and if we aren't modeling the type of behavior for our kids, man, we're doomed, right? Because the
Right.
last thing I want to put out there is another me, or two or three other me's, and I want to put out selfless people versus selfish people, and
Right.
the world needs less selfish men, you know.
Yeah.
um, but I have forgiven him. I do pray for him. That I have no idea of his relationship with Jesus Christ. He may have one. He may not. I truly don't know.
Right.
And But I pray that he does. I
Yeah.
pray that he comes to understand the grace and mercy and forgiveness that God showed me.
Yeah.
He deserves the exact same.
Yep. I mean, that's powerful because, like you said, so many times we may go through a situation, and the typical saying is, "Oh, I'll forgive them, but I'll never forget it." And that mentality really is, you're just saying, I'm not really forgiving you. I'm saying it that I'm forgiving you, but I'm still holding on to all those things that you've done. So,
Right.
like you said, that part of when you start praying for them, it kind of shifts your mentality of not so much vengeance, that you want to see something bad happen to them, but like you said, you want to see him have that relationship just like you have, of coming to Christ and restoring, hopefully restoring some relationships with his boys and all that. But again, a lot of times we just see the opposite, whether it's on the fire department or wherever, they go through a divorce, and you just see the two spouses, the ex-spouses at that point are just so bitter against each
Yeah.
other. And like
Right.
you said, it goes back to that selfishness. But kind of when you really put it in perspective and you take that time of prayer and allowing God to show you, and what you said was, you didn't blame her. Yeah, it was just, part of it was her responsibility, but like you said, at the same time, it was a lot of your responsibility because you weren't fulfilling that role, of being a husband. And that I can relate to that because that's how I was halfway through my marriage. I thought I was a good dad, thought I was a good husband. I was there. We were in church, but there was those parts of, well, I'm at the station, I'm providing, but when I got home, I wanted to do my own thing, like you said, being that selfish person, and it wasn't taking some of those responsibilities. And then it was when God really showed me and really did a checkpoint in my life, with my marriage and everything, that was like, okay, like I said, it wasn't God centered, it was self centered, and
Mm.
allowing God to work through those processes and restore it. And that's just great because that's one of the big things is, of that is to see how God can restore a marriage even after a divorce. A lot of people are like, well, God, we've moved on. I'm going to move on. God's got another plan for me. But, like God had a plan of bringing y'all back together. There was no plan. There's really no plan B. There's a plan A.
Right.
And allowing
Right.
God to bring that back and restore it is just so powerful. And I love that. I love hearing that story, and love hearing your testimony of how God has just worked in your life and in your marriage.
Well, we certainly we certainly understand the value of forgiveness. And one of my favorite quotes from Pastor Andy Stanley is, and it may be not his quote, but it's who I heard from. He's who I heard it first from anyway, was forgiven people, forgive people, loved people, love people. And, that just resonated with me, that if God will forgive me, I have to forgive others.
Right.
If I can be, even if who am I that could be forgiven? If I could be forgiven, I should be able to forgive others.
Right.
And, after a while, in prayerful thought and devotion and prayer, and those words aren't just words, they are real.
Yeah.
You mean it, you really mean it, versus just saying it,
Right.
It's that sanctification process, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Not
That's
overnight,
one.
but over time.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like even with me, because even like you're kind of saying, it wasn't just an overnight process of when y'all got back together. There's still that time of you having to build that trust back up. It's kind of almost like you're
Yes.
having to start over dating again. Like you said, we're starting over again in a sense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of times it's like just going back and building that trust and just allowing God to restore. And it takes time. It's not always a quick process or a quick answer. And just allowing God to develop that. And like I said, I know how that is. Again, same thing in my marriage. It took time. And once you start, like you said, getting in that word and allowing the word and God and the Holy Spirit to speak to you and share with you, it lets you see, they show you, hey, this really isn't the way. This is how, praying, not just praying for somebody, but taking that time to really pray for your wife, praying with your wife. And that was one of the big things that really helped me, that really strengthened our marriage, was that time of, I was praying for her, but then to have those sincere prayers that, is like, I really want to see her blessed. I really want to see her, flourishing, and not just being like I said, being that selfless person of seeing them grow. And that, in a sense, just made the marriage more intimate. And one of the big guys that I follow that was a real instrumental in my life was Dr. Ed Cole, with his books that he's written on men's ministry. And that was one of the big quotes that always stuck with me, was prayer produces intimacy, because it's not always, you pray for the ones that you're close with, you pray for those that you pray to, and then you pray for. So having that time of not just praying for somebody or praying with, you're praying to God, so that relationship with God draws closer. Then you're praying for that person, as your wife, or even somebody that's hurt you. You start praying for them, and that a lot of that hate and bitterness goes away with, like you were saying, that love to see them come to Christ as well. But then taking that time to pray with your wife and your spouse can really strengthen that marriage. And that's what intimacy really is. It's not about just that physical time together, but it's that spiritual time together, that you're praying with each other and for each other. And like I said, you're putting God at the center of that marriage, and that makes that foundation so much stronger. It's a firm foundation, and not, like you were saying, that sinking sand, quicksand type that we hear.
Right. Exactly. Well, Jesus teaches, the parable of the guy who builds a house on sand versus the guy who builds a house on rock, right? And,
Right. Oh yeah.
And upon this rock, my ecclesia will flourish. And,
Yeah.
and this is our ecclesia. This home is our church. This is where we church, and well, it's part of our church, but right, it's
Right.
it's an extension of the church.
Yeah. Well, that was really the first church, was the family, Adam and Eve and their
Yeah,
children. So that was the first part, marriage was first.
right.
So again, it's just wonderful to hear your testimony, Todd. And I appreciate you taking the time to be on this episode and just being able to share your testimony. And I'm hoping that it'll be a blessing to others that may be going through a situation and they don't know where to turn to. But they know that, hey, God restored their marriage. Maybe he can restore it, but hopefully they find that faith to know that God can restore that marriage, or whatever situation they're going through, that God can heal it.
Absolutely. Amen. If I could too, Ryan, I spoke to Chaplain Percy Golden this morning, and he's going to add me to the list of peer counselors for the fire department. So, I'm excited to be able to be a part of that group, and I know you're part of that group as well. I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity to be able to for firefighters who are struggling. So I'm looking forward to the opportunities to help in that peer support group.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm actually going to be on the peer support team as well. So that's going to be very interesting to see, again, what we're trying to do and what they're trying to restructure with the team that they're trying to bring in, because of the situation that took place last year. We saw so many that were hurting and didn't know where to turn to and who to reach out to. And we saw just how that affected a lot of guys, especially for me, because that was a personal tragedy to see, because Brian was a friend of mine. He was my rookie. So I know how that was. But just to see how, and again, to see how we've seen so much that in the last few years, we're trying to understand more of what guys are, men and women on the job are facing with stresses and, life things. And like you said, like we kind of talked about before, who do you go to? Who can you talk to and trust in? But at the same time, it's not just about, most of it is, hey, I just need somebody to talk to. But like the other part is, we want to have somebody sometimes that can pray for us and pray with us, and have that confidence that we can confide in, or they can confide in us, and not worry about, their business being spread around the street or to the next department. Just being able to lift them up, because even then, a lot of times we hear the part of, well, I'll be praying for you. And then they turn around and they're talking to somebody saying, hey, I want you to pray for so-and-so. Well, why are we praying for them? Well, they're going through a divorce. Oh, they are? And before you know it, things are a mess, and the business is out there. So, so just to be able to have that time, to not have that go through. So, yeah.
And that's a good point, because
to have you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And even just to the point you made about the incident with Brian, and I didn't know Brian. I think he may have been on the job before I left, but I didn't know him. But what I saw in the response was just amazing, and I did attend his funeral, and it was just an amazing, beautiful outpouring. But as you are on the job, we encounter just so much horrific and horrendous scenes, scenarios, situations. We're a part of events that can be absolutely life-changing physically, from an injury or maybe an emotional scar. But, we have so many members who just become angry. They may not even turn to abuse of drugs, alcohol, or pornography or whatever. They just become angry and bitter.
Yeah.
And they become poisonous to the people around them, and I think and truth be told, I've been asking to do this kind of stuff since the day I left. Like, I knew that, man, my story could help.
Yeah.
Could help in a marriage issue, but just helping brothers and sisters cope with the very real stressors of the job. It is real. Yeah. And not only you compound that with sleep deprivation, and man, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Yeah, we see it. We know it. A lot of people don't understand it. When you tell them, we try and tell some people the things we see, and then, like you said, those sleepless days, and like you were saying earlier, sometimes you're spending 3, 4, 5, days to a week or whatever at the station straight, and you're like, what day is it? Where am I at? Waking up. And those, and for you, you were at a pretty busy station. So it wasn't like you could, get a full night's sleep sometimes. You were staying pretty busy. And then to turn around and then to function and do other, normal life stuff on your days off, just like I said, it's a wear and tear, not just the physical, but even that mentally. And, for us, a lot of times we feel like we're protecting our family by not sharing the things we've seen. So we just, like I said, we bottle it up, and it just becomes a toxic environment, in our minds and in the situation, and we don't know how to release it. Yeah. And a lot of times it's out of frustration and anger and hatred or whatever, and just those different things. It just makes it, like you said, it's kind of like for you, it's that hazardous material that once you combine certain things, there's this explosion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's just a chain reaction of those chemicals.
Synergistic effect, right? Yeah, right. Exactly right. I got to throw a hazmat word in there somewhere, right?
So, but again, Todd, I appreciate you taking this time to do this interview and to share your testimony. And as we close, I just want to continue to pray for your family and just to see how God is going to restore it, and just even make it stronger than before. And continue to, as you are that light to your wife and to your sons. And I just, again, want to thank you for joining me today on the 318 Project.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. It's been an honor.
Yep, thank you. Wow. What a powerful testimony that Todd shared with us on this episode of the 318 Project. That just goes to show that God can bring healing and restoration even when it looks hopeless, and even after a divorce, that God can still bring that marriage back together. And that was just so powerful to hear Todd share that with us. And I want to thank you for listening to this podcast in this episode. And if you can, just be sure to like, subscribe, and share it. And I want you to have a blessed and wonderful day.
Thank you for joining on this adventure of integrity and honor in godly masculinity. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with other men. And remember to keep building faithful men.